Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be a little different because I've been getting some comments about how I go about making my enclosures for my survival world. So I'm here in a creative world, and I was just gonna quickly, or not quickly, go over how I go about making those enclosures. So the first thing you want to think about is, what kind of creature am I making this enclosure for? Because there's a big difference between an enclosure that you make for a Brachiosaurus, a Compsognathus, whatever, or a Ceratosaurus. Oh, well, anyway, so, of course a Brachiosaurus will require a way larger habitat than a Ceratosaurus might, or any other smaller creatures. So first thing you want to do is get a size estimate. So if I were to take only this cleared out space of land for the Brachiosaurus, it would be quite small, too small actually. But for the Ceratosaurus, it might be just fine. Which is funny that I say that, because my Ceratosaurus in my survival world is in a tiny little space, but I'm still gonna change that. So then the next thing you want to think about is, if you pick your dinosaur, what kind of environment does it live in? So let me go to the dinosaur eggs. Say you take a creature like the Spinosaurus. They are well known for living around watery areas. So your enclosure would be very water heavy. So maybe like 50-50 land and water. And the Brachiosaurus will have like maybe a lake, maybe a river, but mostly land. And of course, if you're going for a water animal, then it's going to be almost completely water, like the Plesiosaurus. This is my creative testing world, by the way. This is where I first designed my visitor center, the lab, the aviary, and the bug house. So your next step will be the preparation phase. That's what I like to call it. And in this phase, you're going to find references. So for instance, this aviary, I had as a reference the aviary from the Jurassic World Evolution video game series. And then I took inspiration from that to get an idea of what I wanted to look like. And then I used World Edit to make a... no, not that. To make a dome. Or not a dome, a sphere that was hollow. Then I cut it in half. And then I pasted it upon a big circular wall. And that's already like most of the work done right there. And for the bug house, some of the references I had were looking at bug houses in zoos, seeing how they did that. And for the inside, for like the naturey part of it, this one doesn't have the same vegetation as in my survival world. But the environment for it, I got the idea from Prehistoric Park. In the episode where they go and capture, I don't know if they capture the Arthropleura, but they do come across it. It was very swampy marshland with lots of water and land mixed together with many brown colors and such. And you can use those references from movies or just like zoos in real life. You can always just Google the animal name and then enclosure, or in movies, and then see what other people have made for it in video games or movies. And with this lab, like I said in the video, I used the broken InGen laboratory from Jurassic Park 3 as inspiration. And that turned out like that before I switched it over to survival. So that's why references are very important. Same thing with the Diplodocus feeder I made here. I also took reference from Jurassic World Evolution and Prehistoric Kingdoms feeder, or like tall herbivore feeder, sauropod feeder. And just testing around in creative first, just like this fence I made for the Diplodocus enclosure. Testing around in creative is always a good idea. Okay, so let's say I picked the Ankylosaurus as my animal to make an enclosure for. It's a medium-sized dinosaur, I'd say, so it doesn't need a whole lot of space. Also, if you check the Dinopedia, you can see its max population, so it's not that big, so you wouldn't need that many, so maybe like 3. And then if you look at that, just kind of imagine how much space do you think they would need. And if I had to guess for these 3, I would say from there to there. Kind of like that. It's a nice and big space, but not too big, so it won't take up all of your time. So the first thing I wanted to tackle in this enclosure was the back wall. The gradient was way too steep, so I went and flattened it out a lot. So now the slope is way gentler compared to before, and it leaves this nice wall in the back that you can use as a natural barrier to keep the animals in. Also, I noticed a dent in the terrain, which I used to make a sort of river. You can always use the natural features of the terrain in some way. Also, there's a cave which ends at the top of where I made this river, so that just means I can place a waterfall there. And now what I'm doing is I'm turning the dirt back wall into a mixture of stones. So stone bricks, cobblestone, tuff, and regular stone. You can just make a nice flat surface and then cover it randomly with an assortment of blocks that you chose to use. And this alone already gives you a very nice starting point for your enclosure. Next, I'm doing the walls or the fences. Actually, it's more of a wall. And it's made out of these segments of big bricks divided by inlaid stones, all from the chip mod, and topped with a layer of slabs and stairs. So I experimented a lot with this, and I tried many different combinations, and this was the one I was happy with, and it looks a lot like the base of the fence of the Diplodocus enclosure. Then I just made a slightly curvaceous outline into the water and turn it into iron bars, and then split that up with some wall segments every so often to not make it so similar all around. Then I added some iron bars on the top of the walls to give it a little more character, I guess, and then some slabs on top of those. That just gives you a nice blank slate to go add vegetation and other buildings or other features. For the next type of enclosure, I'm making a hole in the ground. So what I did was I dug out all of the dirt to stone in a sort of circular shape, but not perfect. The less perfect, the better. And then I kind of kept the elevation that the terrain already had, but just like 3 to 4 blocks lower. I added in the water, or some water in the lower areas, and then exchanged the floor with gravel and added some more gravel along the edges, making it a little random to add some more visual variety. Now I'm digging into the side of the wall, and instead of just having a box there, I'm rounding out the edges a little to also make it more interesting with some coral fans on the floor as a sort of bed. You can also use hay bales for this, or moss if you fancy. Then I added some coarse dirt to one half of the enclosure and some more coarse dirt under some trees. This also adds some more variety into it. Then some path blocks from the cave to the water, and some slabs along the water's edge to round it out a little more. And finally, some grass to make it less flat. In my survival world, my main base, of course, is the Jurassic Park Visitor Center. And I used, well, I mean, there's many images of it. But I used, I think, the one from Jurassic World Evolution of some kind, maybe a DLC of it, as my main reference. For the inside, I did something similar to the movie, added on with some of my own additions. I'm just gonna go through my survival world and give you some quick, maybe long, I like to go on tangents, tips on how I did what I did. So first thing on what you probably shouldn't do is this. So this was my first ever enclosure, and originally I made it for the Velociraptor, which would have been a fine size. However, I had completely forgotten that they climb. So instantly he climbed out. And yeah, I thought if I killed him I could get the DNA back, but he was still too small, so I didn't get anything back. And so I put in a Ceratosaurus thinking like, oh, maybe it's not too big. This enclosure is tiny for him. I need to move him. Don't do this. I mean, you can do this, but just put a smaller animal in here. This one is fine for the Dryasauruses, I think, although it still is a bit small if you add in the water. Maybe I could close this off and make this land as well to make it a little more habitable, because this is quite a tiny space. At first I had breeding on, and there would just be 12 of them in here. I told you about the aviary. I told you about the lab. For the Dilophosaurus enclosure, I didn't have any real references. Neither did I have any references for the trees. I just kind of winged it, I guess. But yeah, as you can maybe tell from my other enclosures, I really like waterfalls. I really like elevation differences, so a gentle slope up there and then a harsh cliff with a cave inside. And it all just, it comes together on its own. So I start, as you could see in the video, with making this area pretty flat and transforming this gentle slope into a much flatter plane and making a cliff right there. And then I just think of, well, that's too boring, so it needs a little more elevation. So I added in these parts. And then I thought of adding in a slope in the middle so you can actually access those parts. Then I added in the cave. Actually, the cave was an idea before all of this. It all came together around the same time. Yeah. Mixed uses of colors with the gradient of rocks. It's hard explaining your thought process sometimes, because in my mind it all makes sense. But sometimes what makes sense to you is hard to explain. I just keep getting lots of ideas and adding on to those again and again. Because at first I only had the cave, and then I had the slope, and then I had the waterfall, and then I had this before the waterfall, and then I had the river, and the custom trees. Like I said, I just kind of winged. Or wung, I don't know if that's in any way correct. And you just make the stem of it, and if you're going diagonal you can add these slabs to make it look less thin, because if you don't have those then it's only connected by this tiny point right here and it looks off, and now it looks better. And then you can add some roots looking things to that. And in general, custom trees just look so good. This is my favorite enclosure by far. I added the ferns, the prehistoric ferns, and I made sure to have some flowers up here. Maybe add some sugarcane, and then this horrible entry tunnel. So yeah, I told you more about that enclosure in the video about this, and last video. Let's see, where should we go next? The Allosaurus enclosure is kind of similar, I would say, to the Dilophosaurus enclosure, but it's just a little more tame. So I used the regular jungle trees and this tree that I kind of hate, and I really just spammed every single type of flower here. I could still add some of these rocks and boulders to the Dilophosaurus enclosure, but I think it's good enough. I think there's a little too many ferns here. The whole jungle floor is covered by them. For the aviary, you don't see the chains right now, but these hanging platforms are connected to these points. I should just walk over here so you can actually see. I thought of these monkey enclosures actually, because we don't really have too many aviary style things in zoos these days. I mean, not that I've seen. So I took inspiration from monkey enclosures that have these hanging platforms that they can jump from one to the other to. And I just thought it might be a nice touch for this enclosure for them to rest on, because they probably like sitting in high places. Are you coming after me? Or are you... Oh, okay. Fish. Cod. Do I have more cod? Why are you hostile? You have food, right? You have plenty. No, stay here. Be tamed. Be tamed. Oh, that's unfortunate. How about you? You like me, right? Yeah, same with these platforms. It's just different, not hanging. Or this viewing area, where it's just kind of like a semicircle, or well, a circle attached to a walking bridge with these grates, so air comes through, and then some glass up top, and then these nice nests on top of high rocks that they totally use all the time. But it all adds to it, you know? And this together with the bug house was why I started practicing my trees more, just without the actual leaf parts. Yeah, I love playing with water. So this area, it splits off into 3 different waterways and collects at each end. So these guys have a place to swim or fish without there being any fish. What else is there? There's the bug house, which I discussed earlier. And then there's the Diplodocus enclosure. With this, I was just thinking of a dried up lake bed. So that's why there's these dead logs all over the place. There and there. And one here. And also this big one laid over the dried up creek. And I scattered around these boulders. All of these things just add so much. Well, I don't even know how to call it. It's just every single thing that you can add has a high chance to make it look better. I don't really know how to explain it. Same with these lily pads. I think it looks really good. Just look through the game, see what's possible, and try to make it work. So, to quickly recap, first, get a size estimate of your enclosure. If you think it's big enough, make it ever so slightly bigger than that, so you're never thinking that it's on the small side. Then prepare by getting references. The more references, the better. Mix and match ideas if you can. Take ideas from other people and make them your own. Make a layout of the enclosure and get an idea of the floor plan. Are you going for a fence, or is it an enclosure that's lowered into the ground, or maybe a bit of both? One side sticks out and one side kind of goes into the ground. And before you make the fences, try to have the terrain work done before you make the fences. Otherwise it's going to be a pain just changing them over and over. And if you're going for a fence, how high does it need to be? How strong does it need to be? If it's a small creature, you can make a small, thin fence made out of wood. But if it's like a big sauropod or an Ankylosaurus, you want it to be thick and strong. Try to add some depth to whatever wall or fence you're making, and divide the walls into segments, so it's not just one big thing. You could have just a 20 block long wall made of stone, but that's just not so interesting. So you could do every 5 blocks you add a pillar, and have some iron bars, and have a base layer on the floor that's made of concrete or something, or some type of stone variant. I won't go into color theory because it's the end of the video, but like try to pick colors that somewhat work together. So a lot of dark colors, earthy colors like the grays, the browns, and the greens. They work very good together. And whatever you do, you gotta be flexible. Enclosures don't have to be symmetrical works of art. So if something doesn't completely line up, You can try to find some way around that by making either the angle of the wall different or something like that. You stretch things out or make it shorter. Yeah, I think that's the whole list. I think I just forgot the main point. Making mistakes is okay. It doesn't have to be perfect on your first try. Just learn from your mistakes and next time will be better. Just try not to make it a competition with yourself and be unfair to yourself. Just do your thing, see how it looks. If it doesn't look right, you will do better the next time. Trust. I hope this was in some way informative. I hope it gave you some ideas for your next enclosure. It doesn't even have to be an enclosure. It kind of works for just building in general. The whole testing, the references and everything. That's how I got better at building in the first place. I quite often hear people say like, I could never build like that. But that's what I thought of like not too long ago. And it's just trial and error and trying new things. So yeah, I hope you found this informative. And we shall be back to our regular scheduled programming soon. I have some ideas for next episode, so be sure to stay tuned and look out for that. And I will see you guys in the next one.